Welcome to our vendor spotlight for September. This is Robert Cheney, CEO of Integrato, and I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us today. Before we start, I want to just take a moment to consider those facing Hurricane Ian as we are online. I'm in South Florida and we're experiencing a little rain and light winds, but as we see from the news, it's much worse in some areas. So we're excited to have Mark and Chris from Continia today. We have implemented Continia solutions with great success with some of our clients, and we're actually using the solution to help streamline our own processes with AP and expense management, and wanted to share this experience with you. So with that, let me hand it over to Mark, who will start talking to you about this further.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Robert, and certainly the whole Integrato team for having us on today. Always a pleasure to talk about how we can help organizations save a lot of time and a lot of money, speed up revenue, save expenses, and ultimately have people really enjoy their job a lot more and get them focused on value-added activities. So going to share a little bit about our view of the world and how we're trying to help organizations do that, and then show you some actual examples and a little bit of magic behind the scenes with a couple demos as well. Chris DeVisser is here with me. Hey, Chris.
Well, good afternoon.
Yes. Hey, so let's go ahead and dive in. It looks like I'm sharing my screen and slides okay. So what are we doing today? Like I said, really looking to help organizations focus on some value-added activities and do some process improvement that technology is very, very good at. We often find that folks install BC or NAV, whatever the case may be, and have a lot of process improvement ideas, and it gets on a list called phase 2, and then they often have trouble getting back to that because normal operations take over and growth and everything else. And so we're here to talk about how you can get back to that list and some opportunities that you probably have been thinking about. We are recording this, I think, and so we will have the recording available as well if you want to share it out with your team. So, you know, in working with as many customers as we do, we have 18,000 installations across all our products across the globe over the past 30 years, and working with as many customers as we do, we still hear an awful lot of just manual data activity, manual data entry, a lot of time spent researching information and pulling up information and dealing with paper and filing, and just, again, a lot of non-value added activities. And it is really surprising how much is still happening out there. COVID really shone a light on that, right? And it really exposed the issues and concerns and so forth with manual data processes. And so if any of these resonate with you, and if you're still dealing with paper with invoices and employee expenses and other typical processes like that, I'm sure these are resonating with you. It's kind of easy to see the pain involved with that. But more than that, there's really kind of a higher level issue, kind of a low-grade fever, I think, with organizations that are still dealing with a lot of paper. And it really doesn't become apparent until it's a huge issue. And so we like talking to organizations about, hey, don't let this become a real issue. It's always present underneath, but what are you exposed to fraud? Are you exposed to risks associated with that because you don't have the right controls in place, right? And again, too dependent on manual processes. What's the opportunity cost of, again, spending all this time and effort dealing with paper and pushing this around, chasing people around for information? And then ultimately, something that's really bubbled up over the past couple of years with the tight labor market, are your employees really actively involved? Are they happy at what they do? Are they feeling like they contribute? I got to tell you, taking information off of paper and keying it into a computer doesn't provide a lot of employee satisfaction, and you have a risk associated with that as well, just the overall engagement, or they may leave. And so a lot of higher level issues at play here, and we like to try to address that. So in fact, to get ready for this webinar, we worked with Integrato to put together a blog on essentially this, right? What are the higher level issues here, and what are all the hidden costs? And so After we get going here, I'll put the link to the blog in the chat here so you can read that afterwards, but hopefully that'll get the brain cells going as well in terms of some improvement opportunities. So how are we combating this? We have 3 different solutions we're going to show you in very quick order today: document capture and expense management, and we'll explain a little bit more about what those do. If you would like more in-depth demos, certainly we can arrange that, or you can hop out to our YouTube channel. We also have a tool called Document Output, and that's for sending out information from BC and NAV, customer statements, invoices, terms and conditions, anything along those lines. And we can talk about that another time if you want as well. But we do have a short time today, so I wanted to jump in. As mentioned, global experience, 30 years, built specifically for Business Central and NAV. And that is just the key differentiator for us. If you look at other solutions, they're generally more generic. They're relying on integrations, API calls, web services calls. We are built inside. We are BC and NAV native. And so we install inside the application. You don't have to worry about any integrations or synchronization issues or timing issues or any of that. And it's a familiar interface. All the information is there on a daily basis for you. So we feel pretty strongly about that, and I think you'll see pretty quickly why that's such a big deal. We also work exclusively through partners. So if you're interested in one of our solutions, you're going to work with your existing Integrato team. They know the solution, you know them, they know your requirements, and so it's a pretty easy installation from that perspective. So let's talk about expense management, employee expenses, and corporate credit cards. We get feeds on a near real-time basis from Visa, MasterCard, and American Express. Of course, it's very easy for employees to enter expenses as well. And that's what we really focus on. Let's make it as simple as possible. Get those expenses in, get them reviewed, get them approved. And again, all built inside, so it's all referenceable inside Business Central and NAV. And just to give you a picture of how this works, we actually have a phone app. Makes it incredibly fast to include an expense, or you have also a portal, browser-based portal that employees can use. We also get those corporate credit card feeds in. They go through the approval process, which you can configure to your business requirements, and Bob's your uncle. So that's how it works at the very high level. Let's see how it actually works in practice. And Chris, what do you think? Can we show them some magic?
Let's do it.
All right.
I'm going to share the screen and let's look at expense management. So as Mark mentioned, we have an app that is available for Android and iOS. I'm showing it to you today in an emulator, and I'm going to show you 2 scenarios, that of corporate credit card users and that of people that are submitting an expense manually. If you have a corporate credit card and that card is associated with you, the transactions come in almost real time as the bank posts them into Business Central. So from an admin perspective, you always see when the card is being used, who used it, for what amounts, and the expense user, him or herself, will get a notification in the app with the open notifications that came in the meantime. So you can see we got 4 in through our corporate Amex. And as an expense user, all I need to do is take a photo of the receipt or select one if I took the photo before. So we're talking about a LinkedIn receipt here. This is the receipt, looks good. And I select that. And that's all I need to do in terms of data entry, because the rest of the information came through the corporate credit card transaction. I can scroll down. You have other fields like department or project code. Those are Business Central fields that, as an admin, you can enable for expense users to interact with, and even make them mandatory. So if you deal with a scenario in your organization where you have billable expenses and things like that, you could do that right there. And by the way, before we forget to mention it, if you have any questions throughout this webinar, please put your questions in the question pane of the interface of GoToWebinar, and we'll try to answer them as we can, or otherwise, if we have some time left at the end, we'll circle back. We can split expenses out. We can enter really any piece of information to the expense. Oh, and then there's always the demo effect, of course. It froze on me, but you can submit your expenses either way. Another way of submitting expenses is through the expense portal. So you can also use the browser on your computer to submit expenses. Now, let me quickly log in here again, and I'll have to do that. My apologies. I thought I had it alive long enough, but it times out after a few seconds, few minutes. Obviously not in the real-time scenario, only in our demo environments.
While Chris is logging in, I did put the link to our blog post out in the chat there. And again, feel free to post questions in the Q&A panel, and we'll keep our eye on that.
Perfect. And an unintended side effect is that we can show you that there's single sign-on and two-tier authentication available for this as well. But back to where we were left, here are the expenses. I need to select that photo of the receipt, and I can submit this expense now, and off it goes. Then I could deal with the other ones as well, right? But in the interest of time, we're just going to move on. We can also enter an expense manually, so we can enter that information as well. If it's not related to a corporate credit card, I select the payment type, cash or private, or any of my other cards. If then later the transaction hits Business Central on the corporate credit card, we automatically match them up, right? If it's cash or private, then we mark it as such as well. And then we also know that we have to reimburse that particular expense. Another nice feature is the mileage module. People can submit the address or keywords of their trip. So if I say Empire State Building, for example, then, Empire Apartments, then it gives me the route here, and I got two different routes. It's 1 mile. Let's take that, and I say visit client, and from there I can submit this. The rates and everything like that is controlled inside of Business Central. I can create a return trip as well, a continue from, or just a one-way trip, which I'll do right here. Per diem, we don't see used an often lot in North America. It's basically an allowance where you give people a certain budget for breakfast, lunch, dinner, accommodation, etc. And that can work with pre-approval as well. And I can bundle multiple expenses into a single report. Right now, I'm submitting them one by one, but if I prefer to do so, I can submit them by report. There's no licensing consequences or anything like that. So whichever works best for your expense users. If any of these features are not used and enabled, we'll turn them off, and we won't bother the expense users with that either. You can also see in the history the status of some of your expenses. So as an expense user, you can always keep track of where things are, if they've been approved and things like that as well. Now we're going to go to BC, and inside of Business Central, the expenses and bank transactions come in automatically, of course. There is a synchronization that runs periodically. You can set the interval, and you can always click on synchronize as well. And if we now look at the pending expenses screen, you see there's one expense that's been submitted, and the status is now pending approval by the group finance. And we have 3 expenses that are pending the expense user because the attachments are missing. So as an admin, you always know what's going on. You have the amounts, you can see the receipts already. But at this point, we're waiting for the manager of our expense user, Bart Duncan, to approve the expenses. And that is being done by his manager, Richard Lum. Richard would get an email typically once a day with a list of the expenses that he needs to approve. And in the email is a link to this portal. It works in any browser, it works on the mobile phone. And here you see that same expense that Bart submitted. We can click on it and we can see the information. We can potentially assign it to a particular project or a particular department. We can split it out so we can add multiple lines to it. We can add comments, we can attach additional files. So a lot of functionality available here for the manager of Bart to approve these expenses or to reject them. And if he wants more information from somebody else, he can also forward it and get other people's input with regards to this expense. I'm just going to approve this one. We're going to look at that mileage quickly as well. That is available in the mileage screen. I can look at that one too. And at this point, the calculation took place, right? It uses the rates as they've been set up inside of Business Central. And I can hit approve here. We always keep a map of the route as well. So you always have that also for auditing purposes. Now, when we're back in BC as an admin and I refresh the screen, you can see one expense is ready to post and one mileage is ready to post. When we look at the expense as the example here, you can see it's been approved by Richard Lum on behalf of the group finance. The status is released. So as an admin, this could be the first time that I see this expense and I am ready to post this now inside of BC. When I post this, because it is marked right over here as matched to a bank transaction, it will automatically reconcile this transaction against the corporate credit card feed that we got from, in this case, Amex. So the reconciliation of corporate credit card transactions is automatically part of this process, and you don't have to spend time, hours and hours each month, puzzling all those things together. The system will do that for you. The system will do the chasing of all the different people involved in this process, both the expense user and the approver. So really, as an admin, you have the constant overview. Business Central is your single source of truth. And if necessary, you know exactly who to reach out to because they are delaying the process here. That was real quick. Obviously, we can always do a demo together with the Integrato team for you specifically and talk more also about your situation. But back to Mark.
Fantastic. Wow. Chris is keeping on time. I appreciate that because we've got quite a bit to go through with document capture as well. Let me grab back the presentation rights. As I am doing this, as mentioned, we're going to talk about document capture and make sure I get the right screen here. There we go. Okay, sounds good. And so folks normally come to us, and I think most organizations, when they start with document capture, they start with invoice automation, AP automation. I think it's something everybody gravitates to. It's a very quick, easy, quick win, right? And it's a place where people typically feel a lot of pain that they want to address. But we have built this solution not to be just about AP automation. We have built document capture to handle really any incoming document into your organization. Anything that you want to bring in and store within Business Central and or create a record in Business Central, we can handle that. And so invoices, again, great place to start. You can realize a lot of bang for the buck very, very quickly, really day one. But as we're going through, I hope that you're able to look beyond invoices and start thinking about other business processes and other documents that you have incoming into the organization. Just a few different examples set up here, but really the sky's the limit. We provide out of the box several different types of documents and business rules around that. You can copy any of those existing templates or come up with your own if you want to handle, again, any particular document. The next place people typically go to after invoices is purchase order. So you have a purchase order that comes into your organization. We can go ahead and feed that into Business Central in the exact same way using the OCR engine and create a sales order out of it. So again, just looking for places that we can get away from paper and get away from manual data entry. So again, a lot of different options, but we're going to talk about invoice automation today, as that can apply for a lot of people. And so right out of the box, we very rarely come across a business requirement or a particular type of process that we can't handle. We're not going to be able to show you all the settings that are available within document capture, but please believe me, it is incredibly extensible. It is truly amazing how much you can do with it. And if you run into a limitation someplace, which happens once in a while, we actually expose our code out for partners so they can perform modifications if they need. It's pretty rare, does happen, but we provide that capability as well. So right out of the box for, 80–90% of organizations invoicing processing, it's absolutely fit right out of the box, and you're good to go pretty quickly. Line level matching, You can code to dimensions, match to POs, match to receipts, all the typical business processes associated with the invoicing process. Let me show you a little bit about where we fit. In the typical purchasing to pay process, we cover the orange box, and very important to understand this. We'll reference this a couple times. You can automate as little or as much as you want within that orange box. Yes, we could even automate the posting. Most organizations don't want to do that, but we give you that capability if you want. Again, incredibly configurable with all the business rules that are built in. The other important thing to note here is we're going to show you how we pick up the information off the invoice. It's based on a concept called a vendor template. And those templates, you can have one or more templates per vendor, and you can dial in how much is automated per template. So for some vendors, if they do great, if they send you great invoices and you never have an issue, that kind of thing, go ahead and automate that. If you have other vendors, there's always a question, always an issue, involves some research. Don't automate that as much. Again, highly configurable to your business requirements. Let's go ahead and take a look. And Chris, while you're switching over, I'll describe the 2 weeks that invoices come in. One certainly is preferred. Get the invoice in through an email. It's a PDF attached to the email. It will be automatically read by our OCR engine. You'll see the results of that in a second. If you're still getting paper in or getting invoices in another way, no problem. Desktop scanners are very capable of handling this now, where you just throw them on a scanner, feed them through. We have the ability even to split up documents or merge documents, whatever the case may be.
Perfect. Yep. And let's look at that. And as Mark mentioned, we can automate as much or as little as you'd like, even on a vendor specific level. And for the purpose of this demo, I went ahead already and automated a couple documents. You can see they're actually pending approval right now. If we're gonna take a look there, these documents are now pending approval, again, by our approver, Richard Lum. The original invoice is attached, but if we look at the details on the invoice specifically, we also have an image of the invoice. And this is always a little bit difficult to explain to people that have never seen Business Central before, but this is a Continia screen inside of Business Central. So this is added functionality because we're built inside. We have the option to do all these things inside of Business Central. Big benefit that the admin teams don't have to work in different applications. Again, Business Central is the single source of truth. Now, before we're gonna take a look at these documents and approve them, what happened with these documents? As Mark mentioned, they typically come in via email, or if you scan them yourself, forward them into that email address yourself. The scanners can nowadays email all those documents as well. We can split a PDF into multiple invoices. If it contains multiple invoices, it doesn't matter if it's from different vendors or not. The data gets imported and then they go to a ready to register queue. If it's a known vendor, if we've processed on that vendor before and we've defined how we want to deal with that vendor, for example, what GL accounts are we going to book this information to, then it could automate it and either send it for approval, or if you do purchase orders inside of Business Central, match it to a purchase order and auto approve the invoice if you would like to. We can also do that three-way match. In that case, we're not only matching to the purchase order, we're also going to look at the purchase receipt lines to make sure that all items have been received. In that case, if all that lines up, we can auto release that invoice and nobody has to look at that invoice specifically because we were able to validate the information already for you automatically. Now, the different document types are listed out here. For the purpose of today, we're going to look at purchase invoices, right? This is a unprocessed document, right? It comes into the queue, and this is where the admin would take a look at it. The first three are marked as okay, and normally these would process automatically if we wanted to, because when they're marked as okay, it means we have the defined setups for where we're going to book this invoice, and we've been able to capture all the relevant information. And you can see if I click on a value here, highlighted on the right-hand side where we pick that value up from. And I can scroll through it and you see it change on the right-hand side where that information came from. And in general, I can always teach the system new tricks. For example, if I want to pick up the posting description, all I do is click in the field right here for posting description and drag and drop a box around it. That data is now entered here, and it automatically remembers this. So next time we receive an invoice from Lewis Home Furniture, whether it's an automated or semi-automated setup, it knows how to pick up that posting description. So any field from Business Central can be added to this again. So if you have specific project codes, if you work with the jobs and the task module, for example, inside of Business Central, some of those multi-entity add-ons that are available, we can pick up any piece of information and even translate it. So if this description translates to a particular project code for you, and you know how to build that relationship, you build that translation once, and then next time we see that description, we know it's related to the same project, right? We also validate all information. So we check if all the amounts add up. We check if in this case, the payment terms are in line with what we expect it to be compared to the vendor card that we have inside of Business Central. And if there are any issues with a document, we can still automate who's going to handle that exception, right? If there is a particular issue with matching, maybe it's going to go to the purchaser of the purchase order. If we need to specify GL account, it goes to the finance team. If there's something with a currency, it goes to the finance team. If there's a pricing issue, it needs to go to somebody else, right? So depending on the exception that we do find, we could still help you automate that exception handling. Here's an example of an invoice that we were able to match. So it's been fully matched with purchase order 1003. So if we go a little further up, you can see that we found the PO number. Because we live inside of BC, we can look up against all the POs of that vendor, but it's been able to fully match it and deal with that that way. And this document would then be automatically approved as well, depending on the rules that we've defined. Here's an example of an invoice where we picked up line details. So you can see all the line details have been picked up. You see that a little bit better in the document card view. You see all the lines have been picked up, and we have a translation available inside of Business Central that an iPad is actually item 1000. If that translation is not there, you could enter it here on the spot. If you're familiar with the cross-reference table of Business Central, then we can apply that automatically as well. That's in fact where these are stored. Or of course, if the vendor uses the same item numbers as you do, then we know automatically how to interpret the invoice for you. So that's how a multi-line invoice works. Obviously, if it's a 20-page invoice, it goes for all those lines as well. And it's smart enough to skip things like the footer because it, for example, requires a quantity and a amount to be present in the same place. Just some examples of types of documents that we can process, but the line level and then specifically the line level matching really makes Continia unique and the only one pretty much that can do that inside of Business Central. But back to the more automated setup, documents get also OCR'd automatically, imported automatically, and registered automatically. If they're related to a purchase order, they go straight to the released status if they match up. If they don't, they're routed for approval. So if I, as an admin, want to see who I'm waiting for, I can see that on the screen here. It's Richard Lum, but I have amounts and due dates already available for me. So for accounting and reporting purposes, I can already include these documents in my accrual reports, for example, for the month if the due date is in this month. Now we're going to go back to that approval process. The approval portal is shared amongst expense management and document capture. So if you were to use both our products here that we're demonstrating to you today, then an expense user submitting expenses to his manager, the manager would receive an email with both expenses and purchase invoices that they need to approve. So here you see the two purchase invoices that we were looking at earlier. We can look at the details of it just like we saw earlier with the expense. I can interact with it. I can select a particular project code, but you define what fields from Business Central are available here for the approver to interact with and which ones are mandatory. So you could make a project code a required field, for example. We can also give the permission to update the GL, but you can see it's still limited to what GLs I can see as an approver. So you can have your approvers help you code these invoices if that actually helps you, of course, right? There's plenty of scenarios where you want to lock any of that information, but if that is something that would help you, you can enable your approvers to do so. I can approve this invoice quickly. I'll approve this as well in the interest of time. If I'm out of the office as an approver, I can also assign people to approve on my behalf in a certain window. So another quick feature that's going to save the finance team a lot of time trying to figure out then who's going to approve otherwise. Now we have two invoices here. One still is pending approval. One is released. This one is pending approval because it was over the approval limit of Richard Lum. So now the second approver needs to look at it as well because it was $7,500. I'll approve it inside of BC. So if you are a BC user yourself and part of an approval process, you could obviously also use Business Central. But now we have two release purchase invoices. And this could be the very first time that the EAP team sees these invoices. They can go in, make all the changes that they deem necessary, but otherwise they can hit the post button and this will post the invoice like any other invoice inside of Business Central. When we open that posted invoice, you still see an image of the invoice available. The original file is attached. We also have available to us an extensive approval log. So if it went through, say, 10 layers of approval, you would have 10 different lines here of who approved it, when did they approve it, when did they receive the request to approve it. So for auditing purposes, a very powerful feature if you need to pull that up in the future. You can also navigate from anywhere throughout Business Central to whichever way these records and transactions link to each other. So you could be in the general ledger working on it and then be able to navigate straight to the document capture document or the file by just clicking on it, and then it pulls it up on the screen for you. So a very nice way to deal with that. One often kind of overlooked benefit of our solution is that everything gets automatically archived, right? All you need to do is email these invoices in, and we automatically store them in a central location and build the relationship to the records inside of Business Central. If you need to retrieve anything from that archive in the future, you can use the document search. And this is a nice feature where you can search, for example, the term Radcroft. It is found on 5 documents, 3 of which are open, 1 is registered. And when I click on View Document Card, it pulls up that exact invoice. I didn't use that information really on the invoice inside of Business Central, but it found the document because it is in the address field of the vendor. So really anything that has been listed in the document can be searched for because we built a search index based on anything, all the data that we OCR. And a powerful example that we learned the other day from a client is that they used this to find an invoice related to a laptop that broke down 2-3 years after they purchased it, and they needed to show the original invoice for warranty purposes. Normally, this is a daunting task if you have hundreds of laptops throughout the organization. Now you can just enter a serial number and it pulls up the original invoice. You just make a print or forward the PDF to whoever needs it, and the warranty claim can be made. And that saved them a ton of time. And that's just one simple example of a single invoice, a single question in an organization where this solution can save you a lot of time.
Chris, just one more comment on that, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Putting my CPA and account hat on, right, when I used to be an auditor, for those companies that have compliance issues once a year where the auditors want to come in and do all this testing, right, you have a week to go find all these documents. With this system, right, you give them the appropriate access and say, go to it, look up and get any supporting documentation you want. So even in areas like that, key benefits.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, thanks. Very, very powerful.
It's my favorite feature, and I don't know if everyone noticed, there's a button there that says view incoming email as well. So you can even see the accompanying email that carried the invoice in. So if you need to go back, get some context around from the vendor, why was the invoice sent, what was it covering, et cetera, that's available as well. I'd like to see some auditors' faces when you point them to the search and let them have it. If they'd be happy about that or just disappointed that they didn't get to make you work a little harder. So
they'll still charge you the same amount, unfortunately.
Well, sure. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you, Chris. And let me switch back over to find our slide here. And so ultimately, again, this is what we're about. We love to hear stories back from our customers about how we help them save a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of frustration, and focus on activities they'd much rather be doing. And so in particular, if I could figure out why it's okay, sorry about that. In particular with Don talking about changing from data enterers to data analysts, I think that encapsulates what we're gunning for so very well. And so hopefully you can start to visualize a little bit about how can you repurpose your team to focus on a lot better activities going forward. So let's let technology do what it's good at. And again, I referenced more in-depth demos out on our Continia YouTube channel. We have a public docs site. All our help documentation is available to the public. We also have a freely available training site. All of our trainings freely available to the public. And we have 4.5 hours on document capture out there. And I think near about that on expense management. So we are very intent on providing you as much support as we can. But again, you would work with the Integrato team to realize a successful project. We work with them in the background as well. And if you want to take a deeper look or get a quote or figure out how this is going to work, then yes, contact the Integrato team. We've got some emails here that you can contact them directly and take the next step. We do somehow have a couple extra minutes for questions. Can't believe we finished a couple of minutes early. We got a new one that just popped in. What does your system do if the email receives a malicious file disguised as an invoice? What do you think, Chris?
It simply won't process it because the OCR kind of takes care of it. If it's the raw data that gets imported, and then it dumps it down to a simple image. If it can't find information that it can work with, it just reads it as an image.
Yep, great question. And we really didn't walk through the detailed steps in the interest of time earlier, but exactly what happens to send those invoices in. You would provide your vendors with AP at or invoices at some sort of email alias like that would be much more user friendly. You would set up an automatic forwarding rule from that user-friendly email to the Continia specific email. So it is passing through your email system, and therefore any kind of spam software that you have or whatever is working there. We would receive it then from the forwarded email and process that through the OCR engine.
Yep. But also, once you did set up a template for that vendor, right, if someone did try to submit a different looking invoice or something not kosher, right, it also helps with that as well, because it won't necessarily recognize that and drop it out of the queue. So
yes,
exactly. And it's going to look for a unique invoice number as well, for example. So either by mistake or with bad intent, it will always be triggered by something like that.
Mm-hmm.
One other, I guess, common item that's usually asked is about storage, right, of these documents. Business Central has a database storage limitation, or they cost more the more you store in there. So you want to explain a little bit how yours takes advantage or helps avoid that issue?
Yep. Yeah, so we can store it in the database, but to your point, Robert, it's not always recommended. So the best option we see is Azure Blob Storage. It's a cheap form of storage in the Microsoft Azure cloud. That is something you obtain yourself and control yourself. So if you, for whatever reason, also choose to stop using Continia, you keep access to your archives, obviously. You keep access to anything that's been processed through Continia before. We're not the type of vendor that's gonna take that information away from you. It's your data, so you are in control.
Would the end users have any idea of where it's being saved?
They could, but it's all linked and traced back to the records inside of Business Central. So Business Central is your interface to access that information.
Right. So they really don't know where it's being saved ultimately. So it's easy for them to still, as long as they see it in the system.
Yeah.
And for those,
they can always look it up. And Yeah,
Blob
go ahead.
Storage is very easy to set up, so it's only a few minutes really to get it working. It's not a major intent as well. So.
Exactly, and it comes with different levels of backups depending on what your requirements are. You could even choose the location of the server center where you want it, so there's a lot of flexibility there as well.
And I did look it up a few weeks back because I was just curious. If I understood the pricing right, it's 14 cents a gig. So it's pretty cheap.
Yeah.
Hey, we have another question. I really appreciate the questions through the Q&A panel here. Is the evidence of approval on the invoice? Our auditors like to see a signature.
So there is evidence of approval on the invoice. You saw the approval log in the demo earlier. That can be extensive as you'd like it to be. There is no physical signature on it that way, of course. You could force them to put a comment on or any other type of field. But yeah, if you want a signature, you'll have to find a way to deal with that. But I think, and that's our experience also with our clients that got audited over the years, that the approval log inside of Business Central is a pretty solid and foolproof way to show them who's been engaged in that document and for what purpose. It's all time-stamped. It's something that they cannot change. Even if you, as an ultimate admin, choose to skip the approval process that is normally set up, there will be a note made of that on the invoice that you chose to do that because you have the permission to do that. If you don't have the permission, then you obviously don't even have that option. And then also that it happened for what reason. So it's very solid, and auditors like actually to have it electronically available on the invoice.
And for many of our clients, for those of you that might have auditors that are a little bit more old school, right, we're happy to have a conversation with them about how the system tracks and audits. We've done that for many clients as part of their technology review from the auditors to help explain the newer audit trails versus seeing a signature on a pen to have to be scanned in. Right. Hopefully we can get past that.
Yeah, and who knows, right?
Set up with super user permissions, you're good. Yes.
Yeah. And there's ways too that you could embed some kind of signature tool if that's absolutely necessary, where you can really certify it. That shouldn't be too complex.
And they don't have to come from emails, right? You could have a scanner on your desktop and other stuff. So there's still many ways to get those documents in the system.
Exactly.
Versus email.
Robert, I don't see any other questions. I think we have one more minute for them, but I think that will do it.
Well, thank you for your time today. Thank everyone for attending. Look for some new vendor spotlights coming forward in the next couple months, but thank you again for joining us. And thank you, Mark and Chris, for your time today. Hopefully we can get some clients interested with some more information.
I hope we inspired some folks, and thank you everybody for joining us. Yes.
All right.